So, to officially kick off a Noble Desktop's live stream for creative compositing with Photoshop, let me just introduce myself. My name is Dan Rodney. I'm an instructor here and course developer at Noble Desktop. I do a variety of things. I do anything from Adobe apps such as Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, to web design with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And those are the kind of things that we teach. We teach design and code-related technologies here at Noble Desktop. Today's seminar is going to be using Photoshop to put together a presentation graphic, and it's not so important the particular graphic that we're putting together today as so much as the concepts you're going to learn in doing this project. So it helps to learn these concepts in the context of a project, but it's just kind of to give a real life example to how you can use these. We're going to learn lots of stuff today about layer masking and blend modes and using layers in varieties of different ways, and all sorts of cool things that you can apply to many of your graphics. But we're going to take a lot of stock graphics and put them together into some kind of interesting, cohesive kind of graphic illustration. So it's also useful because when you do need to put something together and you only have access to stock imagery, you can create something illustrative and interesting and unique by combining a bunch of different stock elements, and you create something that doesn't look stock at all. And a couple things about us. We're located here in New York City. You can take classes here with us in New York City, or if you can't attend live in person, you can attend live online as well. You can screen share into our instructor computers and watch them demonstrate and take part in a class virtually through the internet. So it doesn't matter where you are, as long as you can attend live at the time the class is being offered, you can attend any of our classes. We do these seminars as a way to introduce ourselves to people and also show cool stuff. So that said, today's topics are all written down step by step in an exercise. So I'm going to be demonstrating everything to you and kind of explaining as I go along. But everything is written down step by step. On our website, there's actually a page where you can download the exercise. The link is in the video description, so you can get the link there. But also, I will show you here. I'm going to switch over to my screen share, and there we go. So there's a special URL that you have to know. It's nobledesktop.com/goodies. I'm going to paste it into the chat for those of you who are attending live. This was also in the video description. If you're watching the recording, it's in the video description, and also today live, it's also in the video description as well. And so this is a special goodies page that you have to know the link to get here. There's no button on our website to get you here. It's a secret goodies page. And if you scroll down here to today's seminar, creative compositing with Photoshop, there is the instructions that you can download for a variety of different versions of Photoshop. The CC 2015 is the latest version that I'll be showing today. The instructions are pretty similar for older versions. They might not be exactly the same though, but they are pretty similar. And then you have to download the class files. So get the one for the appropriate version that you're going to be working on. So in the instructions, it's a PDF. You can either follow this on your screen, or you can print it out and follow along, not as I'm giving the video demonstration, but later on if you want practice doing any of these things. Everything's written down exactly how to do it step by step with screenshots. Everything is written down for you. So as you watch today's demonstration, don't worry if you miss anything. You can either watch the video again or just go through that exercise. The files that you download are a couple different stock images. And some files that we prepared as well for you. And before we dive in and get started, let's see the final results of what we want to accomplish today. So I'm just going to open this up in Photoshop here. All right, so let me close that panel actually. We don't need that. All right, so this is what we want to create. as we work, we're going to work with layers and keep as much editability as we can, but we're going to put together a bunch of things to create this color scheme of kind of red, blues, and purples. And the idea, the theme for this is creating a world-class technology organization. So playing on tech, ones and zeros. We chose a font here that has a kind of very circular O's, kind of riffing on that ones and zeros. There's little ones and zeros in the background. We kind of have these subtle zeros creating graphical shapes here in the backgrounds, some globes for the world, actually a globe down here. So we wanted this kind of feeling of light, and here we wanted to keep it a little bit mysterious, so we gave it a little bit of a glow. And some of this we're going to create from scratch, and some of it we're going to adapt from a variety of different images. So for example, here we're providing, let's open this up, providing the ones and zeros typed out for you, giving you the guy, some solar panels, and the solar panels we're going to use as the background here for the type, just kind of an interesting pattern that we liked for that. And the stairs, actually have a bigger stairs, we're just going to cut out the part that we want. That's going to be used here. And then we're going to create these graphical stairs here on the sides. And this world, that's the graphic that we're going to use over here. And we're going to have to get rid of the backgrounds and merge it into this one. So that's the final result that we want to do. And let me go ahead and show you how to do this. All right. So I'm going to create a new file from scratch. And there's a good preset here in Photoshop. If you look in the web section, there's a 1024 by 768 size. And since this particular graphic was intended to be used as like a title slide for a presentation, a lot of projectors you go out and present on are still 1024 by 768. That's starting to change. Some places you go might have HD televisions that you present on if it's a smaller room, or some places have widescreen projectors now. But still, a lot of times when I go to present someplace, unfortunately, they still a lot of times have these kind of low-res 1024 by 768 projectors. So it's always good to confirm if you're going to give a presentation somewhere exactly what the resolution is, but and the aspect ratio most importantly. But we're going to design it at 1024 by 768. Again, if you wanted to do something higher res, or if you wanted to do this for print, a lot of these concepts are still going to apply. This just happens to be the particular size for today's project because we're saying that this is a title slide. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK. All right, so we want to start by creating the background and then starting to overlay the patterns and kind of create an interesting background for ourselves. And right now the layer that we have is just kind of a blank layer, and I want to create a solid color starter base and then apply some kind of gradations on top of that to create an interesting background. So because I might want to change my mind and change the color later on, I'm going to create a fill and adjustment layer by clicking this little button down here. So we're going to specifically create a solid color fill layer. And these fill layers are specifically meant for filling with a color. So when you choose it, they will fill whatever is selected. And if you don't have a selection, then they fill the entire document. But the nice thing about them is that if you ever want to come back in, you just double click, boom, boom, on the layer, and you can change your color whenever you want. So in our particular exercise, because we want to choose some nice colors, we've already written down and kind of provided the colors ahead of time for you in the exercise. So I'm just going to type these in based on the colors that we've already chosen in the exercise, just so I can make sure that this looks nice. So this is kind of a purple color here that we like, and we're going to choose that as our base color. And I'm going to give this layer a better name. I'm going to call it BG color for background. I just get tired of writing out the word background, so I just say BG color for background color. Now I could have just leave it as a solid color, or I could have chosen a gradient here as well. The only thing about these is if you choose a solid color, it might be a little boring, or if you choose gradients, gradients are specifically a certain type of gradient that you have to fit within. It's either a circular gradient or, specific looks. And if you want to have light coming in or colors coming in from different specific angles, then those gradients might not necessarily work to create the effect that you like. Excuse me. So Photoshop actually has an interesting filter called lighting effects. And this allows you to create light sources, and they could be colored light sources, and you can put them anywhere you want and angle them and size them and be very creative. The only thing is it's a filter, so it has to apply to a pixel-based layer, and I want to work as non-destructively as possible. So this layer, if I'm going to be able to come back and make changes to it later, has to be converted for smart filters. And smart filters allows you to basically come back in and edit the filter that you're going to apply. You're going to it allows you to apply the filter non-destructively. So converting for smart filters actually makes it a smart object. And if you haven't said don't show again to this, it'll actually say to be able to make re-editable smart filters, this selected layer will be converted into a smart object. If you want, you can say don't show again for that. So now that that's a smart object, that protects the original layer. I could always go in and edit that if I need to, but it also allows me to apply this filter non-destructively. I can come back in and make changes. So I'm going to choose my lighting effects filter, just so I can create a more interesting background. And when you first come in here, you're basically in the kind of like a little lighting studio. So there's some presets up here, just so you can kind of see the different types of effects that you can get. I'll just choose a couple of them. You're basically throwing in different types of light. It can be a single light, it can be colored lights, they can be small, they can overlap, you can do all sorts of cool, interesting things. We're going to start with something very simple and customize it ourselves. So we'll start with the default settings here. Now the default setting, if you notice, it's kind of illuminating with a white colored light my canvas that I have, and it's showing through a little bit of the color, but it's really darkened up the environment pretty much. So over here there's an ambience, which is like an ambient overall light. So it's kind of like they turn down the lights in the room, but we want to turn the lights back up. So in this particular case, I think something like maybe about like so. Let's go put them back up pretty much. I want to have some brightness here for the lights, but I want most of my light to come back. So I'll go up to about 90, I think. Now, this is your light. You can move it with the center. You can grab any of the edges, and if you notice that you can rotate, you can also pull. You can grab the sides, and if you grab the point, you can change that. Now, if you go very circular, it's like a straight-on spotlight, really shining directly at the canvas. If you go you gotta grab the end here. Come on. Let me go in and scale that. There we go. It was scaling the whole thing instead of just scaling the one dimension. There we go. When you squeeze it like this, it's like turning the flashlight on its side and you're raking across your canvas. So it's like the flashlight's right here, shining, and so you get the brightest thing right next to the flashlight, and then the light, of course, falls off. Now, you also have an intensity here if you mouse over and drag this little wheel right here. So you can change that. Now, that's like going over here on the right and changing the intensity, except that you're doing it directly here on the canvas. So we want two light sources. One to be over here on the right-hand side, and I'm going to move that over here. And I want it to be a little bit bright here so that you can see kind of it coming in onto the image. And the more important thing, though, is that I want to change the color. I want to change it to a red. So the red that I want is 170 with 0 green and 0 blue. So it's not super bright red. It's a little bit of a darker red. That's the color red that I want. Then that kind of mixes in with my blue and makes like a purple. Now, the intensity here is going to be important because I want to have some of that red show through more. We have a good question in the chat. Does CS5 have the lighting effects? Yeah, lighting effects has actually been around for a long time. It used to be like a dialogue window that would pop up, and it would be kind of a smaller area to work in. Then they actually revamped it and made this a workspace so you can zoom in and out better on this. So it might look a little different depending on the version of Photoshop that you're in, but this filter has been around for quite some time. It's not a new filter. Now, you've also got your hotspot amount. So the intensity is the brightness of the light, and the hotspot is kind of how bright it is within this overall space. So you can adjust this to your liking. In this particular case, I think something about like so looks pretty nice. Now, you can add additional lights. The default one only has one light, but up here at the top, you have different lights that you can add. And so you have like a pinpoint kind of light, an infinite light. You have a couple different lights, but right now for today, we're just going to do spotlights because this is a spotlight. And how do I know that's a spotlight? Actually, it's a good question. Over here on the right, under lights, notice it says spotlight. So that's how I know that that's a spotlight. So I can come up here and create another one and just click the button, and that adds another spotlight onto the canvas. And I can move that one around. And I can change the intensity. I can click on the color to change the color of that as well. I want them both to be red. Oh, what just happened there? Photoshop's being a little glitchy at the moment. Huh. All right, well, if that happens, let's try just trashing it. Hello. Okay, well, let's hit OK and then come back into this, which actually lets me show that these filters are re-editable. So I'm going to hit OK. I've got my one spotlight. Notice that over here in the Layers panel, I have the Smart Filters, and the lighting effects is there. I can turn that on and off. I'm going to double-click on the lighting effects to go back in, and let's give this a second shot. All right, so up here, we've got our spotlight. I'm going to click on that. I'm going to move this over here. There we go. Click on the color box over here on the right and make this my red 170 with 00. There we go. This is working better now. I'm going to increase the intensity because I want a brighter light here. And I'm going to make this a little bit overall. So the way that I'm using these particular lights is I know I'm going to have my title. And I know I'm going to have this guy on the stairs. And so I'm basically kind of having these kind of rake in, kind of pointing towards where I'm going to have the guy with the stairs. And then over here, I'm going to have that kind of globe. So I just want to create those kind of two things, kind of pointing to those two things, like the globe over here and the guy that's going to be on the stairs here. All right. So, all right, so this is good. I like this. If you ever need to switch spotlights, you can click on the one and click on the other to change the settings up here. And also you can disable them if you want to see what it looks like with or without those spotlights. Okay, when you're done, you can click OK. And it renders it. But the really important thing here is the reason we did a smart filter was kind of like what I just said just a moment ago, is you can disable and re-enable the effect, the filter, and you can double-click to go back in, and you can change any of the things. If we had not done the convert for smart filters, if we had not made this a smart object, then we wouldn't be able to go back in and make any of these changes. We'd be stuck with what we started with. Okay. If you ever need to change the base color, the kind of purple color that we're working with, because this is a smart object, you can double click on the smart object layer, thumbnail, and it just tells you that when you're done to click save. So, okay. So here's my original layer with the original color, and I could go in and change that to something else. Click OK. And like it told me to, when I'm done, I can do a file save. And when I come back, then I see my document has been updated with that new color. You can't edit it live, like in the document, you do have to edit it in a separate window. So I don't want to make that change, so I'm going to step back, save that change, and you can keep that window open and come back and see how that looks. You just can't preview live as you work when you work with a smart object. So smart objects aren't perfect, but they do help you to be able to make changes later on, even though you can't preview the changes live as you work. So I got my little background here, but to create a little bit more interesting texture, we're going to put a pattern on top of this. So what we did is we created a file for you of, let me go down to my desktop. Here's my files. We created a Photoshop file with a bunch of ones and zeros typed in. And this is a separate layer. If you notice, there's a background, and there's the binary number layer in here. Now, normally this would be a type layer because we just typed in ones and zeros a bunch of times for you. We converted this to pixels. We rasterized the type layer. The only reason we did that was because we didn't know if you'd have the font, and we wanted just to make sure that this looked fine. It's not like you needed to be able to go back in and edit that. And normally your type would have anti-aliasing turned on. We disabled the anti-aliasing on the type just to kind of give it like a more old school kind of bitmap kind of look to it. When you view this at 100% or actual pixels as they used to call it, you don't really notice too much the lack of anti-aliasing, but it just kind of looks crisp and sharp. Normally, most type, you want anti-aliasing turned on, but we kind of liked the effect in this particular case. Now, this is a layer that I want to get into the other file, and because these are tabs, dragging and dropping can be a little bit tricky between files. So let me show you first the way that the exercise will have you do it, and that's going up to Window, Arrange, and going to a 2-up view. You could do it horizontal or vertical. Typically, you have a wider screen, so vertical is a better layup. And then when I click on this document, I can see the layers that are in this document. You do want to make sure of which document you're in. If you're in this document, click on that. Or if you're in this document, click on that. I want to make sure I'm in this document right here. And you could just drag over to the other file and drop. Now, when you do that, it makes a copy of that, but it kind of drops it in the middle. Not in the middle, it drops it wherever you drop it. So let me hit delete for a second. Whenever you just drop it, see, drags and drops, it just kind of lands wherever you put it. So here's a little tip. When you're dropping it, hold shift. And when you hold shift, it'll center on the other canvas if they're different sizes. Or if it's the same size canvas, it keeps the position, which is nice. Just be careful if you have a selection, because holding shift while you drop would center on the selection if you have a selection. So that's one way to do it. Let me delete the thing from this document over here and show you a different way to do it. So let's say I put this back to consolidate all these things into tabs. So here I'm back to having my two different documents open as two different tabs. And let's say I want to keep them as tabs and I want to drag and drop between those two tabs. You can actually do that. Use your move tool, drag from here, drag to the tab and wait till it switches. Then the important thing is to drop in the canvas somewhere down below. I'm still going to hold shift when I do that because I want it to keep the same position as the other document. But the key thing is to not drop it on the tab. That's the mistake that a lot of people make. When they drag and drop, they just let it go on the tab and then nothing happens. You can't drag and drop on the tab. You got to drag up to the tab, but then drag back down into the document. They want to know where you're dropping it, and so you have to drop it on the document. So, nice little tip there for you. That one's not in the handout, but just an extra little bonus there. It was kind of hard to describe that in an exercise, but much easier to show in a video. Okay, I can close that other file. Don't need that anymore. Now, this is pretty blaringly obvious here. We want something more subtle, so we want to lower the opacity down. Now, a couple things about lowering opacity. You can click the little button here and slide the slider over, but you can also drag right on the word opacity as well. So you just drag right on the word. Anytime you see the hand with these two arrows, that means you can scrub on that. So you get a scrub right there. Another way to change opacity as well, just as a tip, this one's, again, not in the written exercise. I'll sprinkle little tips throughout this video here. The basic steps are all going to be written down for you in the exercise, but some of the little extra tips I'll just throw out here in the video so I can explain them. If you hit 5 on your keyboard, it'll go to 50% opacity. If you hit 8 on your keyboard, it'll go to 80%. Now let's say I hit 1, well that goes to 10%. If I hit 2, it goes to 20. What if I want to go to 15%? Well, instead of hitting 1 and waiting, you got to hit 1, 5 in quick succession, one after the other. If you wait after hitting 1 for too long and then you hit 5, you're going to switch to 50%. So hit 1, 5 quickly and you'll go to like 15%. So we just wanted something very subtle sitting in the background here. Cool. So subtle little background of the binary numbers. Now we want to start to create the title that we have up at the top. So I'm going to go to my type tool, come here and click on my canvas. And I'm going to type in all capital letters, creating a world class. So the second line is going to be technology organization, but the first line is just creating a world class. Now I'm going to highlight that line here and go to my character panel and start to style it. So window, character. Here's my character panel. In the exercise, we recommend using Futura, which is a nice font if you have it. It has very, very round O's. If you don't have it, you could probably substitute something like Arial or Helvetica, but Futura has very round O's, which is why we liked Futura. But if you don't have Futura, you can find something similar. And in this case, for the small type, I want to use a bold weight for that. And I want to make this a little bit bigger. Now, in the menu here, there's only a few select sizes, but if you want to make something bigger visually, there's a variety of ways you can do that. But one of the ways is you could just drag right on the icon for type size. You could do that up here in the options bar. You can also do that here in the character panel. Now, in this particular design, we also want to really stretch out the type. And so we're going to make this quite tracked out. So we're going to keep it actually a little bit smaller. We're going to keep it down like 26 pixels. And we're really going to track this out so that it kind of goes across most of the screen. And I want to make it white. So right now, if we see it's black, so I'm going to highlight it, come down here to my color block and click on that, and choose white. Just drag into the corner to get pure white. Okay. Now, I'm going to click anywhere in the line of type, and I'm going to zoom in, actually, so we can see this a little bit better. So speaking of anti-aliasing, you might have wondered when I mentioned anti-aliasing, you're like, what is anti-aliasing? What does that mean? I don't know. Or you don't know much about it. Maybe you've heard it a little bit. So with type specifically, you can choose the quality of anti-aliasing. And when you go to print, this doesn't really matter, but when you're doing on-screen graphics like a title screen like this for a presentation, it does matter the quality of the type. How sharp or soft is it? So normally you don't want to disable anti-aliasing because it looks really poor. You get this pixelated, ugly type. So that doesn't look very good. And anti-aliasing is set for an entire type layer. So that's why I could just click anywhere in the type layer. You can't set one word different from another unless you make them separate type layers. So the different types here, sharp, crisp. You're like, hey, what's the difference between sharp and crisp? It's just different computer algorithms, and some favor certain fonts and sizes better than others. So there's no real right or wrong here. It's just aesthetics, whichever one looks best. Strong does have an intended purpose that when you have very thin typefaces that are small and they start to fade away because they're so thin, strong will help to thicken up the typeface. And that way you can still have thin type without it kind of breaking up on you. And if you notice when you look at the type, it does get a little bit thicker. It's not fully going onto a bold, it's just making it a little bit thicker. So, smooth is just kind of what it says. It's smooth. If you're on a PC, you'll only have PC or Windows, it'll say, whereas I'm on a Mac, so I choose Mac. If you're doing web design and you want to simulate a web browser, Mac LCD is the best choice for simulating a web browser. In this case, I kind of like the look of the smooth. It looks nice, so I'll just choose that. But it doesn't make a huge difference in this particular typeface because it's not super thin and lightweight. Okay. All right. So now, as far as positioning this, of course, when you're doing your own design, you would just normally kind of position it somewhere. But just to point out, because in our exercise we wanted you to put it in a specific place, and you might not realize that you can actually now in Photoshop put things into specific coordinates, X, Y coordinates. So X is from the left and Y is from the top. Using the Properties panel, you can enter in a specific position on the document. So notice as I change this, the X and Y position updates here in the Properties panel. So you can actually get it exactly where you want it to go. And it actually is really nice for trying to line up multiple things with each other. So if you have two things that are at a specific place, you can say, oh, well, the one thing is 21 pixels over from the left, so I can make the X 21. And, oh, the other thing is down 110 pixels from the top, so I can make that 110 pixels down from the top. In our exercise, we just gave it as a way to make sure that your design was matching up with ours, but it's also really useful when you're doing your design in general. Okay. Now, we're calling out the O in world class, and we're going to have the O in organization kind of line up with each other, and we're going to call them out. So I'm going to use my type tool to select the O and just change the color of that O to be a different color. So I just click this little color box right here for character, and this color red that we're choosing is 233, 24, 25. That's the red that we want. Okay, and you can see the red there. Okay. All right, so there we got that red, and I want to make a new type layer down below for technology organization. When you choose to make a new type layer versus just hitting return, to me, when I want to move them separately and do different styling, when I want to kind of move them independently, that's when I decide to make a new type layer. So I go to my type tool and just click down below so I get a new type layer. So now we're doing technology organization. And for this one, I'm going to go with a book, which is a thinner weight and something that is not nearly as tracked out, something that's much tighter, because I'm going to go with a bigger typeface. So mainly people are kind of looking at technology organization. Even if they don't read creating a world class, they'll see technology organization. And I'll use my move tool to kind of move this here. And I can use my arrow keys on my keyboard just to nudge this around. And I'm trying to get the two O's to kind of line up underneath each other. All right, so going back to my type tool here, I can make this white, clicking on the color box there and choosing white. And then the O that's here, I want to make it that same red. So I'm going to click on the color box again, and I could just come out here and just target that and sample that red to pick it up so I don't have to type it in again. Okay. Whenever you're done with type, I like to hit escape to commit my type changes. Now, in older versions, that's just what Photoshop did. Recently, Photoshop started giving you a choice of what do you want escape on your keyboard to do. Do you want it to cancel the text changes, or do you want to commit them? For me, hitting escape is very easy to do. I like it to commit those type changes, basically accept those type changes. Because I always have Command-Z, or on Windows, Control-Z, available to undo them if I didn't like them. I want a quick, easy way to get out of my type and kind of commit those changes without having to hit the little checkbox up here or having to switch tools or something. I want an easy keyboard shortcut. So I like to hit the escape key and do the committing of the type. By the way, that is a preference which can be found under Photoshop Preferences if you're on a Mac, or if you're on Windows, go to the Edit menu, and under Edit Preferences, you'll find this same thing. It's here under Type, and there's a preference if you ever want to change this later, use the Escape key to commit text. Okay? While I'm here, one of the other things that I'll just mention under units and rulers, because I'm doing web design here, I should not necessarily web design, but an on-screen graphic, I'm going to switch everything that I have here to pixels. So pixel rulers and pixel type, and just make sure that all my units are based on pixels because that's how we measure screens. Okay. All right. So we've got the type now, but I want to make it look a little more interesting. Maybe add some effects to this. So when we want to add an effect, let's say a drop shadow to this and a glow to that, you can select your type layer over here. So I'm going to select creating a world class. And you can go down here to the effects menu, and you can add a drop shadow that way. Or you can go up to the layer menu up top here and say layer style and add a drop shadow that way. It's the same exact thing. Pull this over here. If you're using an older version of Photoshop, this might be reordered in a different order. Drop shadow might be up top. They reordered them in a certain version of Photoshop so that they were top to bottom order. And since drop shadows are always on the bottom, that's why they are on the bottom here. So I select drop shadow over here, and you can change your darkness here. You can change your angle, and let me just zoom in here so you can see this a little bit better. Okay. So notice you can change your angle and your distance. Now, let me give you a super great tip. This is just another tip here that I'm giving you. It's actually not written down in the exercise, just a great little tip. You can come out here into your document and you can just drag your shadow around. Notice that in the window there, the angle and the distance are changing as I drag. There's nothing to tell you that this is going to work, but it has totally worked for the entire history of Photoshop since Photoshop 5 when they added this. And I'm not talking CS5, I'm talking Photoshop 5, way before the Creative Suite and the Creative Cloud. It's always worked. It's a pretty awesome trick. Even old-time Photoshop pros don't necessarily know that you can do that. So yeah, you can adjust the angle. You can adjust the distance manually, but I like to just drag it around. You will have to adjust the opacity here to your liking and the other things like size, get that to be what you want it to be, but you can just drag that shadow around. It's a great little tip there for you. Okay. So now that's been added over here into the layers panel. You see the little effects, which you can collapse if you want, if you don't want it to take up so much space. And it's a live effect, so you can come back in. You can double click on the drop shadow, change any of those settings around later on if you want to. I want to add a glow to this type. Now, another way to get to your layer style dialog is actually not to go into any of these menus. There's a trick. You can actually just double click to the right of the layer name. Even if your panel here is kind of small and you see the little dot, 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 there's always a little bit of space to the right of your layer name. And you can double click on that space and you get to the layer style dialog. Then you can click on the name outer glow to add the outer glow. Now that's important to click on the name. This is an interface that I think has confused a lot of people. I've seen many students struggle with this. When they click on outer glow, they click on the checkbox. Now you notice I'm still seeing blending options here because I'm in the blending options section. Checking on the checkbox does not show you the options. It simply checks on the thing without showing you the options. Now, personally, I can't imagine checking on a section and not wanting to see the options. So I've always thought that Adobe should automatically highlight the section that you click on, even if you're just checking it on. So to avoid that issue, always just click on the name, and then you'll see the options on the right. Okay. So then I can set whatever opacity that I want. I can spread it out to push it out so you see a little bit more of that halo. Size does make it bigger, but within the size, spread will push out more of the light stuff. Now you have to be careful not to go too heavy with the spread, but having a little bit of spread helps to push out some of that brightness a little bit further away from your element. It spreads it out closer to the edge where it ends. All right. So there I just have a little bit of a glow to create an interesting effect there. Before I get too far, I'm going to go ahead and save. So I'm going to save as into my compositing files. This is where all the other files that I've downloaded. I'm just going to call this Dan Composite. Now this is my editable file that I can come back to, make changes later on. It's not necessarily the exact file that I would put into my presentation, but because I need to be able to make edits and change this later on, I'm going to make sure I save it as a Photoshop file. Saving as a Photoshop file maintains all the layers and all the editability and everything. And it's always a good idea to maximize the compatibility. I don't know why Photoshop even bothers asking you this. I would just say don't show again. It just means that it's more compatible with other apps like InDesign if you're taking it into there, or with older versions of Photoshop. So it's just a good idea to always have on. All right. So let's make the background for this type a little bit more interesting. I want to bring in those solar panels. So we can bring in things a couple different ways. We brought in the binary numbers here by dragging them in. But what if we want to size something and we're not sure exactly how big it's going to be? So that's actually the case for the solar panels. The solar panels are pretty big. They're bigger than this document. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place them into this document. When we place, and this used to just be file place in older versions of Photoshop. Place, if you just have the place option and you don't have these two, place linked and place embedded, your place option is technically a place embedded. Later they added the option to create as a link, but before they added the link option, it was always place embedded. So place embedded just puts a copy of the file into this document, and you don't have to worry about losing those files later on. If you place it as a link, it actually maintains the link to the original document. If you're used to InDesign, that's how InDesign always works. It always maintains links. I think in Photoshop, though, unless there's a reason why you have to have a link to a file, like other people are contributing to that and you want to quickly pull in the updates that they're going to do. For the most part, it's just easier just to embed everything so that if you ever need to send this Photoshop file to someone else, you don't have to worry about collecting all those links and packaging them together. I'd rather just embed everything into this one Photoshop file and just have one thing to send to people. So unless you need the link, I'd say most of the time you probably want to embed. So I'm going to place embed, and I'm going to choose my solar panel image. So when I place it, automatically it scales to fit into the document, which is useful. That's nice. It keeps the proportions, but notice up here at the top, it says 80%. So it's automatically scaled from 100% down to 80%, and that's useful. That's good. I'm just going to double click to accept that size. And I'm going to drag it down below the type here in my layers panel. So now it's underneath the type. I'm going to slide this back up to the top here. And I do want to do some transforming here. So I'm going to go back to edit free transform to get my transform handles back. So I'm going to pull this up. And I don't want to squish it too much because then I think these lines get a little too close together. So I don't want to make it too squishy, because I don't want it to be too distorted. Even though there's a little bit more than I need here, I want to make it a little bit narrower because I want to get more of the stuff in, but I don't want to get it to be too tight. So let's say something like that I think looks pretty nice. It's a very similar color to what I've been working with, but not exactly the same color. And it's not taking on the red color that I have here. So I want to do some type of blending, and also it's competing with the type a bit too much. So we do want to lower down the opacity on this so it's a bit more subtle. But before we do the opacity change, I want to do a blending mode. So blend modes are an amazing thing that I think is confusing for a lot of people when they first get started with Photoshop. I know they confused me for a while until I started using them and really understanding them. And actually, it took really teaching them for me to finally understand when to use them instead of just playing around with them. You can actually get a lot of interesting effects just by playing around, and I definitely encourage that. But let me explain, at least in concept, some of these. They do try to group blending modes together. Well, first of all, what is a blending mode, right? So if we go back a moment, kind of even further, blending. Blending means to see two things, or kind of merging two things together. If you blend, chocolate and milk, you get chocolate milk. You don't have chocolate. You don't have milk. You got chocolate milk. You blend it. That's a good blending, right? I love that blend mode. Chocolate milk blend mode. Now I'm getting hungry. So opacity. Opacity is another form of blending, right? So if I lower down the opacity, I'm getting blending. I'm getting a combination of the top layer and all the layers that are underneath. Yes, that's cool and interesting, but maybe I want to blend in different ways. So let me pop the opacity back up. The blend modes give you different ways to blend the current layer into all the underlying layers. They do group these blend modes into similar groups. So this group here is going to darken in general, some way. So for example, if I do multiply, this layer can only darken underlying layers. Interesting. Now the next group is going to, in general, lighten something. So if I choose lighten, it brightens up the underlying layers. It can't darken them, it can only brighten them. Interesting. The next group is kind of a combination of the first two. For example, overlay will screen the highlights or multiply the shadows. So if I choose overlay, we get some brightening and some darkening. So generally, this group is going to play with contrast. And if you think about a soft light or a hard light is harsher and more contrasty, whereas a soft light is not so contrasty on someone. Vivid light is even more contrasty, and linear light is even more contrasty, but they generally play with contrast to some extent. These are about inversion, and they get a little bit funky. Useful in some cases, not what we're doing now. And the rest here are related to color. Now, luminosity, if you think about the luminosity of this layer, separate for a moment with me color and luminosity. So what does luminosity mean? Well, luminosity is illumination, and illumination means light. Well, light, you've got lightness and darkness. So if you separate in your mind the color of something and the luminosity of something, and they're two different things, under normal blend mode, you are seeing both the color and the luminosity of this layer. But when you choose to blend only part of it and say, I only want the luminosity, but I don't want its color, where is it going to get the color? It's going to get it from the underlying layers. So watch my image as I choose luminosity. We keep the luminosity, we keep the lightness and darkness exactly as it is right now, but it throws out the color of this layer, and instead it takes on the color of the underlying layers. So for example, if I went in and added a new solid color underneath this, it doesn't matter what that solid color would be, it would always be adapting to that color that's underneath, because all we get from the solar panels are their luminosity and not their color. The color comes from what's underneath. We only blend the aspect that we like, and in the case of the solar panels, we only really like their luminosity, and we want the underlying color. So that is a really, really useful blending mode, that luminosity blend mode. Of course, I also want some additional just lightness here. So I'm going to lower down the opacity just to make that not as competitive with our type, but that's kind of interesting. All right, so that's one blend mode that I use often, very super, super useful blend mode, and just takes on whatever background I have now, background color, I should say. Now, we want to get rid of some of the top and the bottom. We want to get rid of that. And I don't want to actually delete it because I don't know necessarily how much I want to get rid of. I might want to change my mind. I just want to hide it. And so for that, we're going to use something called a layer mask. So we're going to select the area that we want to see. And maybe something a little bit bigger than that. Maybe something like that. Once you put that there, you can drag it up and down just to get exactly the right place. I like that. It's good. I want to hide anything that's not in my selection right now. So I make sure that my layer is selected. And I go up here to Layer, Layer Mask, and I say Reveal that selection, which means everything else will be hidden, but only reveal what I have selected. That menu item is exactly the same as coming down here to the bottom of your Layers panel and clicking the Add Layer Mask button. Only what's selected is revealed. Everything else is hidden from view. And I do mean hidden. It's actually still there. If I go to my Move tool, there are two things. And let me make these icons bigger so you can see them a little bit better. I'm going to go into my panel options, make my thumbnails a little bigger. There you go. because I can make this wider. There you go. Actually, I'm just going to double click to close that up for now so you can see more of my layers. That's better. So now you can see the two thumbnails. This is the art that you see. That's the solar panels. And the right thumbnail, that's the layer mask, or also called opacity mask. The term mask, if you think about a mask where you put it on your face, you can't see part of your face. It's masking off your face. But that kind of analogy, I don't think, for me, kind of let me understand really what masking was about, thinking in terms of like a face mask. Because a face mask, you kind of obscured part of it. But for me, what helped me to understand masking was thinking about masking tape. So if you think about masking tape, why do they call it masking tape? Well, because you're going to mask off the areas that you don't want to work with. So there's basically the idea of if you're going to paint a window, you mask off the wall and the window panes so that you only are painting the wood frame around the window. So you mask off all the stuff you don't want to work, and what's left over is that looks normal is the stuff you want to work with, the stuff you want to paint. So that's kind of the idea of the mask. If you think about a mask, it kind of masks off or hides the stuff you don't want to work with, and whatever is left over, that's the stuff that you want to see. Masks work on a white and a black idea because it's an on or off concept. They don't introduce colors. It's just a black and white issue. You either see it or you don't. So, for example, if I use a paintbrush and I paint with white on my layer mask, so no, I'm not going to target this. I'm going to target my mask. If I paint with white, then I get to see those solar panels wherever I paint. If I flip that over and paint with black instead, then I'm going to be hiding those solar panels. So they're still always there. I can always go back and paint with either white or black to hide them or show them. It's just a matter of which color I paint with. Now, I don't want to actually do those changes, so I'm going to go back before I did my paintbrush and undo that. One way for you to remember, is it white or is it black in your mind? When you walk into a pitch black room, you see nothing. So everything is hidden. When you shine a white flashlight on something, you illuminate it so you can see it. So if you paint with black, you're throwing it into your pitch black room so that you can't see it. If you shine your white flashlight on it so you can see it, now you can see it again. Okay. So hopefully that helps you to remember which one is which. Don't think about it for too long because you've got a 50-50 shot. It's white or it's black. One of them is going to be right. So if you try white and it doesn't work, flip it over to black and you will get it right. Everybody gets it right within 1 or 2 tries. So you got a 50-50 chance. That's pretty good. Wish the lottery was that good. Okay, so I've got an interesting background. That's a little bit better. I like that. Let's go ahead and didn't mean to click there. Let's go ahead and save that file. All right, now just to punctuate the edge a little bit more, to help kind of better define that edge, we're going to use a homemade kind of customized bevel effect. I know I can use the bevel effect that Photoshop has, but it's not exactly the look that I want. We want to create a more interesting look. It's a little more subtle, not exactly the stock bevel effect. So I'm going to choose my solar panel layer, so I work on top of that. And we're going to create, basically, if you think about a bevel, bevels are just a little bit of highlight and shadow. And so we're going to create just a single pixel line of highlight and shadow. And so there's actually a single row marquee tool, which I very rarely use, but in this case, it's a perfect tool for us to use. I want to select a single row, and we'll do the highlights, and then we'll do the shadows second. So we'll start with just the highlights. And if you think about this, we're going to have like a dark and a light pixel. And by having a dark and a light pixel right next to each other, it's going to create something that kind of looks like it goes in and then goes out, kind of like a bevel kind of an effect. So we're going to do the dark on the top and then the light underneath. So it kind of looks like it goes in and then pops out. So it's kind of like a little bit of inset and then outset. So I'm going to select that pixel. Now, normally if you just click, it only selects one pixel. But if you shift click, you'll be able to get a second pixel. So I'm going to select this pixel just on top of above the solar panel background. And I'm going to go down below here. And I'm not going to select the pixel right below because that's actually going to be a dark pixel. I'm going to go one past and select the light pixel down here. So I shift clicked that so that both of them are selected. Okay. So I want to lighten up this area. And there's a variety of ways you can lighten up the area, but an interesting way, I think in this case, that keeps the color scheme going that we're working with is to do an adjustment layer. Now you can do these up here through the layer menu, or you can go and do them down here through the layer menu as well. The difference is that here, if you do them this way, you don't get any options ahead of time. You set them here in the layers panel kind of afterwards, which is fine, not a big deal. If you do them up here through the menu this way, there we go, then you see this dialog ahead of time. So if you're somebody that forgets to name your layers, maybe this is good to do it through the top menu because it forces you to remember to name them right away. So these are going to be the banner, bevel, and we're going to start with the highlights. Now, this is an adjustment layer. We're doing a curves adjustment layer in particular. Curves allows you to really customize how light or dark something is. And if I just click OK, and nothing changed because I haven't actually adjusted the curve, I could go in and start brightening up using an actual curve adjustment. But here's an interesting thing. We're going on this idea of a blend mode, right? So let's go back here where I have my selection, and let's redo that new adjustment layer. We're going to do curves, but this time when we do it, let's call this banner, bevel, highlights. Let's use a screen blend mode because I know I just want to brighten this up because highlights brighten. So let's choose a screen blend mode. And what I find interesting here is that even though I haven't done any curve, this is just a stock unadjusted curve, just using a curve layer, curve adjustment layer in a screen blend mode will lighten whatever you put it on. But it's still lightening just whatever you have, so it's brightening up the reds or the blues or the purples, whatever the color is. Now, you can further pull this over if you want to have more brightening effect, but actually I think just the stock amount is perfectly fine. So we can use that screen blend mode to automatically just throw us into a darkening effect, or sorry, a brightening effect. So if we want to do the shadows, well, screen highlights, right? Well, screen brightens, right? Because remember, this is in the lightening section. If we want to go to the shadows, shadows would be multiply. That would be in the darkening section. So I need a second copy of this layer. Now, the quickest way to copy this layer is using a keyboard shortcut. But I want to show you where that keyboard shortcut is found. It's layer, new, layer via copy. So Command J on the Mac or on Windows, Control J. That is, I think of it as jump a copy to a new layer. It's a great keyboard shortcut to learn. Command J or on Windows, Control J. And this is going to be the shadows. And I'm going to just flip the blend mode to multiply so it darkens things. Now, right now, they're in exactly the same spot. So this tries to highlight and brighten it, and this tries to darken it. But they're over top of each other, so they're kind of somewhat canceling each other out. I need to use my Move tool, and watch when I hit my up arrow just once. Hitting my up arrow just once just nudges it up 1 pixel so that the shadows are on the top, and then the highlights are down below. And let's just zoom in just so you can really see that. So the dark part on the top and the light part underneath. The same thing happens down below. On the bottom, got the dark part and the light part. But the cool part of it is it doesn't matter where you are, it's always adjusting to the color of your background. And that's the nice thing about using an adjustment layer as opposed to actually filling with a particular color. And I find that this gives an interesting variation to the line color. Instead of just putting like a white line and adjusting the opacity, this gives you a little bit nicer effect. So a little bit more subtle. Okay. So save. So a little bit better than a typical bevel, something a little bit more interesting. Okay. All right. So I would now say that our banner is done. That text is good. And now we're ready to create some of the other elements that are going to be sitting around our image. So we're going to start with some of the other background elements and then kind of work on top, putting the background down, then putting the foreground down of the guy with the stairs. So we'll start with the background being those kind of big O's that kind of sit around. in the background, kind of creating arcs. And some of them want to be kind of subtle. Some want to be a little bit more pronounced. So I'm going to go use my type tool and just come over here and click and type in. Now, when you're typing in O's, just consider whether you're typing in a lowercase o or a capital O, because sometimes they can feel a little bit different in terms of thickness and weight. Just something to kind of think about since we're doing O's as kind of zeros. And also, actually, a zero would be different. I don't want a zero. I want an O, either a lower or uppercase O, just because the O's are more circular in this particular font, and I really want that circular shape. That's really why I'm doing it, just to create something that looks like a circle. All right. I want to open up my character panels. So you can open up the character panels by going up under Window, Character, or Paragraph. There's also a little button right here as well that you can click, and that toggles the character and paragraph panel if you'd prefer that. It's another way that you can get there, as well as keyboard shortcuts. This one, I want to be a little bit thicker, so I'm going to switch back over to my bold font for this. And I want this to be bigger, so I'm just going to drag on the font size icon there. Get something that looks kind of like a size that I like. Maybe 250 looks good. We don't need any tracking on this anymore. And I also don't want white, so I'm going to click on the white color box right there. And I want to go with a kind of a reddish color. So let's do, actually, let's just use the same red. So we'll just come over here and we'll just sample the same red. There we go. So we don't have to type it in again. Good. All right. So I'm just going to kind of plop that in the middle there. And I don't want it to be overbearing on the page, so I want to lighten up the opacity. So we'll go and lighten up the opacity. Again, you can pop that little arrow down to drag, or you could just drag right on the name, or just like hit 2 or 3 or 5. The nice thing about that is you can kind of watch your image as you hit the keyboard shortcut and see if you like it. We're going to have a bunch of O's here, so I'm going to name these. This is going to be the right small O, because we're going to do some other bigger ones in the center and the left side of things. So we're going to say that's okay. We can always move that later on. Okay. Now I want another one here in the middle, so I'm going to use my type tool, click again, do another O. This one's going to be a different color. We don't want everything to be reds. We're going to do a blue on this one. And all these colors are changeable later on, so even though in the exercise we're having you type in the specific amount, when we were originally designing, we were playing around with it and experimenting, and you can always come back in and change things in your final composite to get to the exact color you want. So if you're wondering, you're like, how did he come up with those color values? It's just playing around with the color and seeing what looks nice. And when you are doing that, if you go, let's say, to, for example, the brightness slider, right? So this can just lighten or darken the particular color, or you can go to saturation and saturate or desaturate a particular color, and that really helps for you to experiment with different colors. When you're in the hue color picker, this just rotates between colors and is nice if you want to experiment with colors, but once you want to refine a color, you might want to refine it by saturation or by brightness. And I think a lot of people don't even realize that there are actually these different color pickers built into the color picker because they didn't really know what these little radio buttons did. So that's what they do. All right, so I want this to be a lot bigger. Actually, we're going to make this like 650 pixels, huge. But yeah, we're actually going to keep it, let's keep bold. But we're going to slant it just to keep not everything necessarily being exact circles. So we're going to do a free transform on this. So free transform, and we're going to kind of squish it and slant it. So again, on this, you can, anytime you have a little icon, label, whatever it happens to be, a value there, if you go to the label, whether it's an icon or a piece of text, you can just drag on it to see what it does and kind of preview the effects. And so we're basically kind of slanting this over. You can also click into a value and use your arrow keys. Now, if the regular arrow keys going up and down go in too small of an amount, you can add shift and it goes faster. Still might not go as fast as you want, which is why that slider is nice. So you can just drag on it to experiment with that. So we ended up wanting quite a bit of slant to it, and maybe not quite that squishy. Maybe something like that. And you just double click on that to accept it. All right, so now the only thing is that I don't want that on top of my banner, so I want to put those O's underneath the solar panels. Yeah, so because I want that to be background type stuff. Okay, so then this is the center big O, and I want to add a drop shadow to that to create some depth. So anywhere on the right-hand side here in this empty space, I can just double-click to bring up my layer style. Click on the word drop shadow. Now, before I drag around, notice that if I drag this shadow, notice that the other shadow changes. The one for creating a world class. That's because right now, global light is turned on. So when I check that on, it's changing a global light so that all of the directions, all of the angles will all match because it's trying to keep realism here. The only thing is that realism sometimes is a little overrated. Sometimes we like to be creative. And so I'm going to cancel that and come back in, double click on that. Before I do it, because if I change this right now and it changes the global light, even if I uncheck it, it still had changed the global light. Before I do anything, I'm going to uncheck global light. And now when I move this around, notice the other one does not change. So only the other layers that use global light would follow the global light, but not every layer has to follow that global light. Okay. So that way you could do something a little different angle. I also want this to be kind of soft and big. Something like that. Don't worry, we're going to make this a lot more subtle in the background. It's not going to be as intense as this. So, okay. I want to make a copy of this and put another one over here, kind of a smaller version of it. So I'm going to Option drag, or on Windows, Alt drag. So anytime you hold Option on the Mac or Alt on Windows and drag, you create a copy of something. You can then throw on a free transform, make this smaller. There we go. Change the color. I want to make it a little bit darker. In the exercise, they're going to have you choose a different color by inputting it. But let's just say you want to choose a little bit of a darker color. I could do that. I could go to saturation and it's kind of saturated a little bit. So I create a variant of the color, but still really kind of close. It's cool. All right, so then this is the left small O. There we go. And if this takes up too much space, you can collapse the effects that are on them. Okay, now, these are too overbearing. It's just, they're too noticeable. So I want to make them more subtle. One of the ways to do that is simply by adjusting opacity, of course. But let's start with the center one, the big one. By the time I lower the opacity, I'm losing the effect, right? So here's an interesting thing. You can remove the fill, but leave the effect. So fill is really referring to fill opacity, but not effects. Whereas opacity is referring to fill and effect. It's removing both. So you're lowering, and if you go to 0, you have no fill and no effect. But you can all go all the way to 0 fill and have no fill, but yet have an effect. Or you can have a little bit of the fill. That is a cool effect. That's neat. So we're going to do that here on the left small O as well. You know, you can still, if you want to reduce the effect overall, you can still lower opacity some. Right? So you can adjust both. But if you want to adjust the fill so you have less fill, you can do that. And then still, if the effect is too much, you can lower that. In terms of keystrokes, if you hit 6, it's doing 60% opacity. But what about fill? If you wanted to do a shortcut for fill, well, you just add shift. So if you do shift 3, you do a fill opacity of 30. So 3 would do opacity, shift 3 would do fill. So I'm going to do 6, for 60% opacity and shift 2 for a 20% fill. All right. So, and you can play around with those to see kind of what you need. All right, so we're a little bit over halfway through, and we like to take a 5-minute stretch break, restroom break. If you're following along in the video, you will be able to kind of fast forward this. But if you're attending live here, I'm going to put up a 5-minute break timer and get us started. So go use the restroom, grab a drink, stretch, whatever you need to. And we'll get started in 5 minutes. Alrighty. Time to get back to it here. And actually just want to mention just a couple things before we get back to it. So like I said in the beginning, when we got started, for those of you who aren't familiar with Noble Desktop, even though we're located in New York City, any of the classes that we offer, those are all available that you can attend live in New York City, or you can attend live online. So, for example, August 29th through 31st, we've got a Photoshop Advanced. Goes into advanced retouching. It's from 9 to 4:30 on, and that's Eastern time because we're in New York City. So, so you could attend that live online if you can't make it here in person. We also write great workbooks that are step-by-step. Those are available as eBooks or in print. You can also get the bundle as well if you want. The eBook comes with a Mobi file for Kindle, an EPUB for everybody else, and also a PDF which you can view on screen or you can print. And it's a great thing if you prefer the ebook side of things. So we've got books for all of the classes that we teach, and they're all step-by-step project-based books, great for learning. And you know, it's if you want to learn more, it's a great way to learn. So hopefully you'll check them out in addition to these free seminars. So so that's it. Let's go ahead and get back to the Photoshop project that we're working on. Okay. So next up is we're going to create some little globes, right? Because we're doing world class, so we're going to make like little kind of otherworldly worlds. So I need a layer for that, and we're going to just create pixel-based globes here. I know there are gradient layers that you can choose, but in this case, I think it's a little easier to manipulate gradients when you can drag from kind of start to end. So I think it's a little bit easier to do these as traditional layers. So I'm just going to click this new layer button to create a new blank layer, and we're going to call this globes. And we're going to go in and create a couple globes. So I need the elliptical marquee. I'm going to hold Shift as I draw this just to make a perfect circle. And don't need to be taught about this, so I'm just going to close that up, get rid of that. It's a new CC 2015.5 thing, so we're just going to ignore that and get back to our little circle that we made here. I want to fill this with a gradient. I'm going to fill this layer with some pixels that are a gradient. So I'm going to come back over here to the gradient tool, and I want to do a radial gradient, so I choose the radial gradient type up here. These are your different types of gradients. You can mouse over to get a tooltip, and the icons kind of look like what they do. But here, in this little preset menu, we can choose some of the pre-made gradients. Now, there's not a pre-made gradient that I want, so this little pop-up menu of presets is not appropriate. I'm actually going to click directly on the gradient to edit. I know that's not necessarily the most intuitive thing, but you click on the gradient, and then you can edit the gradient. So up here at the top, we have opacity stops. So we can adjust opacity if you want to make it transparent and then opaque. We don't want to do that. We just want to change color. So then we're going to work on the bottom. The bottom are your color stops, so you can introduce different colors. You can drag them off if you don't want a color there. You can click in an empty space to create a color, and you can double-click any one of them to change the current color. So I'm going to double-click on this one, and we want to choose like a red color. And because we already made up the nice colors up ahead of time, I'm just going to go ahead and type in. So we got a red that I want. And then over here, so most of the way, I want it to be going from red to a blue. We're going to go, and in the exercise we say about a location, you drag it to the location, or you could just type in, like, if you want to be at the 80% location or the 85% location, you could just type that in, and it moves the selected one. Notice that one of the color stops has a black top, and that's the currently selected stop. So, and if you ever add a stop and you don't want it, just drag it off to get rid of it. Or you can click delete if you want. So I'm going to double click on this one, and this one I want to be a blue, right? So I'm going to do 51, 54, 102. So it's kind of a bluish purple color. Now let's say I drag that off, and I have a little bit extra here. When you click, wherever you click, it actually it just kind of creates a new color stop. But if you there you go. If you option drag instead of clicking, so let's say I click, whatever the last color was, it creates the last color. But let's say I want another red. I could option drag a red, and then I'd have another red one. Or if I want another of these kind of blue-purple, I could option drag. This would be alt drag if I'm on Windows. So why is that useful? Well, on the bottom here, let's say I go in and I just put a little bit of brightness on this. What's interesting about this is you just create like a little bit of a kicker light. And a lot of times when things are round, sometimes they have like a little bit of a glow underneath them too. Even if they're getting shaded, sometimes there's a little bit of a bounce light. And that can create something that's just a little bit more interesting than something that simply goes from light to dark. If you put a little bit of a lightness underneath it, so basically the same color, just a little bit lighter, then it creates an interesting gradient. So that's kind of the gradient that we tell you to type in, but we're just giving you the amounts. But that's kind of the theory behind it is light to dark, and then put a little bit of lightness on the bottom, and check this out. So I'm going to drag, holding shift, so I go at a perfect 45-degree angle, and it's just kind of interesting with that little bit of lightness underneath. So it's kind of from light to dark, but with a little bit of brightness. Let's get rid of that. Just kind of interesting three-dimensionality to it. Let's do the same thing again over here. So this one we're going to make a little bit bigger. I'm holding shift to make it a perfect circle. And then we go back in. Oh, I see a question in the chat. Just in case I hadn't answered that. To get rid of the colors, I'm just dragging them off. So, and you could click and you could hit delete. That's another way to do it too. But if you're doing it and you don't want something, just drag it right off. Same thing up here. Just drag it off. Drag it up or down, and you'll get rid of it. And that works in all the Adobe apps as well. Standard gradient editing for Illustrator, InDesign, Photoshop kind of works the same way everywhere. Cool. And I made sure that that was underneath the solar panels because I didn't want it sitting over top of the solar panels. I wanted it to be underneath. Now, they might be a little bit bright, so we can lower down the opacity so they're just a little more subtle in the background. And that's the same thing with any of these layers. You know, if they're ever too intense, you could just lower down the opacity on any of those. Okay. So, next up, we have that image of a globe. Now that we've kind of created our own kind of fictional globes, we have our own actual globe picture. So let's open that up. Or actually, let's just place that in, because maybe I want to play with size, which kind of brings up the question, when do you drag something into a file, like open it and drag it in, or when do you place? For me, if I'm going to play around with size and experiment, placing is always better, because when you place, it places it as a smart object. You could rename this place embedded, and you could say place as an embedded smart object. Because it's a smart object, it protects the original and all of its resolution, so that if you go bigger and smaller when you're resizing, you never lose quality because it's always referring to the original rather than reinterpolating and resampling the image. So when you place a file, it's kind of protected, and you can size it up and down and size it up and down and size it up and down without loss of quality. If you're not sizing it and you want to edit it directly in the image, then it's probably better to open it and drag it in rather than placing. But since I'm not really editing this photo, I'm just placing it and sizing it. I think it's better to do it as a smart object, so I'm going to do place embedded. Oh, and getting back to the gradient that we just done, I see a question in the chat. He was asking, how did you create a color? And you just literally just click in an empty space to put a gradient color. So if you click just in that space underneath, it puts a color. And if you want to edit, it's a double click. And then you can edit the color. Okay. All right, so back to placing the globe. Okay, so we're going to file, place embedded. We're placing in this world. I'm going to place it down here. I really only want the top half of that. And I'm going to place that under all this stuff, so it's kind of behind. Or actually, no, better yet, let's put it on top. This would be a better example here. So you see there's a background. And that's kind of a problematic background because it's dark, and there's all this soft stuff, and that's a pretty detailed piece of art. And I really just want to get rid of that black. So this is going to be a little tricky. Am I going to make a selection to get rid of the black? And that would be a really tricky selection to make. And we're actually not going to bother making a selection here. I'm just going to call this world. There's a really cool trick we can do with a blend mode. And we're going to choose screen blend. Now watch when I do this. Ah, amazing. What just happened? Why did that work? Okay, so going back a second. So we chose, when I was picking out this image, I specifically found a globe that had a pure black background. Now, if it had a really dark gray background, I'd want to crank up the contrast on it so that it would become solid black. But I chose something that had light and dark because I wanted that dark background to just disappear. I wanted it to be just using kind of the bright parts of it. So, sorry, screen here. When you choose the screen blend mode says that this layer is only capable of brightening whatever comes underneath it. It cannot darken it. And so that means that only light stuff is going to be visible on this layer. Anything that's dark is going to disappear. If you think about black, does black have any brightening power? No. Black has no brightening power. So in the screen blend mode, black is invisible. It has no effect because there's zero brightening. Now, the closer you get to white, the brighter it's going to make whatever is underneath. So notice it's going to adapt to whatever color scheme we have underneath. And all we're seeing is the bright parts of this layer. The opposite of that would be multiply. So in that case, multiply says you cannot brighten anything. You can only darken something. So the white parts disappear. White is invisible on a multiply blend mode because it can only darken things. Now black completely darkens, but there's other things that are somewhat dark and they just slightly darken things. So multiply is for shadows. And if you think about a shadow should never brighten something. A shadow is the lack of light. A shadow only darkens. So multiply is like your shadows. Screen is like your highlights. If you think about a highlight only brightens something. A highlight can't darken something. So it's an amazing thing if you choose your imagery right. And I specifically chose this stock image because of its dark background. If this was a blue background or some other color, it wouldn't have worked as well. I looked around for something that was light on a black background so that I could do it super quick. So if you think about using blend modes ahead of time, you can actually choose better stock art that will allow you to more quickly create your final image. Of course, we can still back off some of this brightness if we want to, lower down the opacity. Pretty cool. Okay. All right, so next we're going to do the stairs. All right, and the little guy on the top of the stairs. So I'm going to open him up, the stairs and the guy, and I'm going to drag them in. And the reason I'm going to drag them in as opposed to doing a smart object is because I want to do some editing directly in there. I want to remove some backgrounds, and I want to edit them in the context of the document that I'm working on. And so because of that, I am going to drag them directly in. So I'm going to do the arrange to up vertical. There we go. And let's go grab this staircase and drag it over here to the right. Okay. So I'm going to just drag this staircase in, plop it on there, close that up. Drag the guy in, plop it on there, close that up. All right. So now we're going to call this business dude. You call him businessman, but I'm going to call him business dude. And I'm going to call this stairs. All right, let's hide the business dude for right now. We're not getting ready to get down to business with him just yet. We're going to do the stairs first. These stairs are way too big. We need to scale it down. So we're going to do edit, free transform, scale this down. I'm going to make sure I hold shift so I'm not distorting this. Get down, and I don't want the flooring down here. I just want the stairs because that'll also get rid of some of the uninteresting parts of that. And I need to leave enough space for the guy up here. So maybe something around that size is pretty good. I like that, so I'll just double click on that and accept that. Now I want to get rid of the outside parts, and I want to make this kind of more graphical. So I'm going to do another layer mask here, which means I need to select the parts that I want to see. So I'm going to choose a polygonal or polygonal, however you want to say that. Polygonal, polygonal, tomato, tomato. And I'm just going to go across the top here, click, click. I'm going to make a straight line, well, not straight up and down, but diagonal line here. It's technically straight. It's not kind of wavy or curved or staggered. Maybe about like that. Like so. That looks good to me. Okay, so I want to hide the rest of the stuff. I want to show only what's selected. So I could come over here and click the little mask button down at the bottom. That would do it. Let me undo that. The other way you could also do it would be to say layer mask, reveal selection. Same exact thing as hitting that button. Okay. All right. So now let's show the business dude and put him on top. He's way too big. So we're going to do a free transform again. Hold shift as I drag it smaller. I want him to be some kind of nondescript kind of guy looking up. I don't need him to be super detailed or anything. That's it. That's pretty good. I think he might be a little bit high, so I'm going to lower him down a little bit. And I'm just going to actually lower the opacity for a moment just so I can see through to the stairs. And I'm going to actually grab the stairs and just use my arrow keys just to nudge it down just a little teeny bit. There we go. Now I can put him back up. So I want to get rid of the background that he's on. I just want him. And I don't have to be super precise because ultimately we're going to kind of blur him out. Because the idea that we had here for this was like he's looking up into like the glow of like a heavenly light coming down. And so like when you step into the light, there's kind of like sometimes there's like a haze around you and it kind of gets foggy. And, you know, so want it to be kind of clear here and then up as it goes towards him. It's not so much about seeing a crisp, clear guy, but just putting yourself into this of let's kind of blur him out like he's getting further away from us in the glow of the light. So let's remove the background here. So let's use the magic wand. And we have to be careful with this because even though the background's pure white, his cuff is practically pure white too. So we ended up having to go with a really low tolerance just so we didn't get that white included. And then we need to shift click underneath his arms and kind of around his legs to grab these other parts to add those to the selection. Shift clicking will add to your selection. Okay. Now that got us the background, but we really want him, so we need to select the inverse to get him. And I want to see how good this selection is. I don't know how good this selection is, so I want to refine the edge. Now it used to be called Refine Edge, and in the very latest version of Photoshop, the update that just came out, CS CC 2015.5 is the very latest version that just came out recently. They renamed this Select and Mask. It works almost exactly the same. It's just that before, when you click this used to say Refine Edge, and now it says Select and Mask. It's also found under Select and Mask. Again, in old versions it said Refine Edge. Whether you click the button or use the menu, it doesn't matter. It's the same thing. And now, instead of a dialog popping up, it's now a panel that's over here. And you pretty much have the same options for the most part for what we're doing today. But you do have some new things if you're doing more advanced selections. But otherwise, if you have the Refine Edge version, it's very, very similar to this. I want to preview this selection on the layers that I currently have. So it's going to give me a better selection. I don't want to preview it on black or on white or anything like that. I just want to show it on the layers. So I double click on that to choose it. And we notice that we have a white halo that's not attractive. So we can use Shift Edge, and if you go to the right, you're shifting it out. We want to shift it to the left, so we remove the edge there. I know there's going to be a couple little white spots left over, but I can fix that myself in just a moment. That's good enough for getting rid of the halo. We want to output this as a layer mask so that I can edit it, so that I can get rid of those remaining white bits. So we're going to output that as a layer mask. Okay. So now that I have a layer mask, remember the thing about layer masks. You can paint with white or black. Not because you see white or black, but because they're metaphors. White means reveal, black means hide. So I want to paint with black because I want to hide parts of this. So I'm going to go in with a very, very small brush, really tiny brush, and just go in there and just get rid of the white spots that might be left around there. Okay. If I view this at 100%, we can see actual quality. That's a little bit small there for you guys, but let's zoom in actually. There you go. So it'll be okay once I do the blurring. I'm not going to do a super great selection on him because, like I said, I know I'm going to blur him in just a moment. So we've got him on the staircase. He's sitting at the top there, and I want to do a blur that's kind of a progressive blur, that it's sharp on the bottom and it blurs more as it goes through the guy. So I really want to take the stairs and the guy and have them merge together and blur them. I still want to keep the sharp version underneath. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the stairs and the business dude layers. Those are the sharp versions. And I'm going to make a copy of these and merge them together, and that's going to be the blurred version. And that's the one that we can blur. So we'll still have the sharp ones as separate things, and then we'll have a combo merged one that is blurred. So I'm going to shift click, so I select both of those layers. And then in the panel menu, we can say to duplicate those layers. And just click OK. So now we have a copy of those. Exactly on top, so you don't even notice that anything changed. And we're then going to take and we're going to merge those layers. So it's just going to merge those selected layers. And so this is going to be business dude blurred. Now he's not blurred yet. We actually have to blur him. So we go up to filter, blur, Gaussian, however you want to say it. It's your standard kind of straight blur. And by blurring this, but still having the sharp version underneath, it kind of makes this ethereal look where we still see some sharpness and we see some blurriness because we're able to see through the blurry version to see the sharp version underneath. So it's kind of neat. Creates a kind of ethereal, kind of hazy look to it. See, if I hid the underlying ones, we'd just see the blurred one. And if I hide the blur, we just see the sharp one. Okay. So I like that look as we get up towards the guy, but I want to see the stairs more clearly, so it's kind of like leading us up into there. So I don't want to see the blurred version the entire area. I want to see it only as I go up. So I want to hide it away. I want to mask away the blurred version down below. So that means I need to add a layer mask. And this time, I'm going to start with a layer mask that just starts by revealing everything. So this is like an empty layer mask. Reveals everything. Nothing changes. I just get an empty white layer mask. If I undo that, you can get the same effect by just clicking the layer mask button with no selection. If there's no selection, nothing gets hidden. Everything is visible. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to paint with a white and black gradient. So there's actually a preset for black and white up here. And remember, black hides, white reveals. With gradients, gradients start on the left and go to the right. So we start with black and we end with white, which means we start with hide and we end with reveal. We start at the bottom with hide and we end at the top with reveal. And you see what that just did. Let me zoom in and redo that again. So let me undo. So you start at the bottom with hide and you drag up to the top with reveal, and you've just kind of hidden the blur effect down below. So if I hide and show this layer, actually let me hide the stuff underneath and you can see it even better. Oh, I forgot that I was on this radial. So it actually kind of did a radial thing out. I actually wanted the linear type gradient. There we go. That's better. Yeah, let's do something like that. Okay, so if I hide and show the blur part, notice you don't see any change down here on the bottom. That stays sharp. You don't see the layer there. And you just see it on the top part. So you got this kind of ethereal blur haze around stacked on top of your sharp version. Okay. All right, so now he seems like he's just sitting out here in the middle of a platform in the middle of nowhere, and there's only one way to get there, but we want to give a couple different ways to get to the same place. Like you have different options on how to get to this final place. So we're going to create a more graphic look of stair steps going down here. Now, you could probably do this maybe a little bit more easily in something like Adobe Illustrator, but we wanted to keep this just a Photoshop tutorial and just use Photoshop only. So how would you go about doing this? Well, we do need a layer that we can work on. So I'm going to create a new layer. And I'm going to make sure that this is underneath the stairs because I want it to be behind. I don't want it to cover over the stairs. And I'm going to call this my graphic stairs. And I'm going to make a black filled area over here on the right. I'm going to do I'm going to hold shift to make this a perfect square. Pull this over here. Okay, I want to fill this area. Now, with filling, you can say edit, fill, and you can fill with a specific color, or you can fill with black. Right? You can do it that way. In the exercise, we give you keyboard shortcuts because we want to encourage you to learn the fast ways of doing things. So as far as a keyboard shortcut, if your foreground color is black, and my foreground color right now is black, on the Mac, you can do Option Delete, or on Windows, Option Delete. Oh, sorry, Alt Delete. So Option on the Mac or Alt on Windows, you hold that key while you hit Delete, and you'll fill with the foreground color. So Option Delete or Alt Delete. Okay. So now the trick is evenly drawing stairs. Forget any of the other tools for doing that. If we want a perfect square, we got to use the rectangle selection tool. But making all your stairs equal heights, that's the trick. So we need to change this to be a fixed size. And you kind of guess your size initially. So anytime now I click, I'm always getting a fixed size. Now I have to tell you, after you do this exercise, the next time you come back in and you're trying to make a selection and you're like, hey, why is this not working? Don't forget, change it back to normal when you're all done. But for now, we want to do a fixed size. Okay, so if it's too big, you can always change it, but 25 seems to be pretty good in this case. It's kind of a nice size for us. So when I click here, it makes a perfect 25 by 25 fixed size. I want to zoom in so I can really see what I'm doing here close. I'm going to shift click to add another rectangle. Shift click, and I want to make sure that I get this exactly at the right size and placement. So, sorry. Not the right size. I already got the right size, but the right position. You don't want to do an overlap, right? You don't want to have a disconnect because when we go to delete the right-hand side that we don't want, that would flow through and you'd end up deleting both sides. You want to get it so there's no overlap and they just touch. So shift click, So each time you're holding Shift to add to your selection, and you just keep Shift clicking until you finish up. And if you get it a little bit off, just do a Command Z or Control Z on Windows, undo. Even there, like, see, you don't want that. Control or Command Z. Almost done here. All right, and then you just go until you can't go anymore. We're good. Okay, we're going to fade out the bottom anyway, so don't worry about if it's not quite perfect at the bottom. That's all going to be faded out in just a little bit. Okay, I want to delete this. So I just hit delete on my keyboard to get rid of that. And so that kind of created the shape that we want. Now I want to delete this side easily without chopping off any of these parts. So it's all solid color, so the magic wand makes perfect sense. I want a tolerance of 1, the exact color I click on. And I don't want any sort of anti-aliasing because I don't want it to like potentially smooth over into the next edge. I want it to be a hard edge. All this stuff is just hard edges. And then you just hit delete and it gets rid of it. In the future though, you'll want anti-aliasing to be on, so make sure you turn that back on when you're done. Okay. Pretty good for the one half. So now I want to flip it and make the other half. So remember our keystroke on the Mac, Command J, on Windows, Control J, made a quick duplicate. Now I just need to flip it, edit, transform, flip horizontal. I can drag it over here. I'm holding Shift to make sure I don't move it up or down. There we go. I want to select these two and just merge them together. Shift click to select both. And then merge those layers. There we go. And I want to add a glow, because if this is glowing, then I want the rest of the stuff glowing. Oh, and I got to give that a better name there. There we go. So I'm going to double click on the right-hand side of the layer, just like we learned before. Click on outer glow. That looks like a decent outer glow, kind of like that. Actually, before I do that, let's cancel that for a second. I want to do that in a moment. I want you to be able to see something else before we do that. I mentioned about fading this in. Just like the stairs kind of fade from being clear to being blurry, this is way too much dark black. And so I only want it kind of at the top. So I want it to fade away so we see more of the background. So we're going to do kind of a similar mask that we did before. We're going to add a layer mask that reveals everything by clicking the mask button. Everything's visible. It's because there was no selection, so nothing got hidden. We're going to go back to our gradient tool, which is still set to a linear black to white, which means hide to reveal. Hide to reveal. We're going to drag up and hides it on the bottom, but it reveals it gradually as it goes up. That looks a bit more subtle. I like that look. Okay, now we can add the effect. Okay, so let's double click, go back in, add the outer glow. Now, if you remember how this looked a moment ago, this looked really nice a moment ago because it just was the edge, but now it's got this weird like lightening effect there. So why is this being so lightened? Well, if you think about it, the glow finds an edge, and right around the edge, it adds a glow. But if you think about this edge is not a simple sharp edge. Like these edges are sharp, so you get a distinct sharp edge, and then you have the glow around it. But here, this is like the most giant, slow edge. And so you get a glow along the whole entire edge. It can't clearly go to like a sharp edge and add this small glow. So it's basically like a giant glow. That's because of the layer mask essentially is kind of defining a new edge. It's just a long, never-ending edge. I don't like that brightening effect. I like the dark stuff. So there's a cool option here under blending options where normally the layer mask is going to create a new edge. We want to turn on this layer mask hides effects. So normally layer masks don't hide the effect. They only hide the element that's creating the effect. But if you turn on layer mask hides effects, it kind of changes the order in which the effects are done. So normally the layer mask is applied and then it adds the effect to the result. If you turn this on,
First, it applies the layer effect, and then the mask is applied. So the mask actually also hides the effect. If you notice, the effect is very visible up here, but as you keep going down, the effect starts to be masked away. So you see less and less of the effect. It's something that doesn't come up very often, but it did come up in this particular example. I wouldn't say it's a common thing. It's good to know, kind of put it in the back pocket of your tricks, and just in case you ever need it in the future. It did come up in this particular case. I'm going to switch to my move tool and just use my arrow key just to nudge that down a little bit. I think that looks nice. All right. So we're looking pretty good for the stairs. Got our little graphic stairs. We could do a couple more things though, and right now we're kind of in refine mode. We wanted to kind of draw more attention to the world over here. So as a couple extra visuals, what if we created like big lines, kind of beams of light coming down to this world? The easiest way to draw those would probably be the pen tool. Now the pen tool, if you're drawing curves and things, that can take a bit of time to master. But drawing straight lines is easier. So I'm going to use the pen tool, and I have to make sure that this is set to path and not shape. I don't want to draw like filled rectangles. I want to draw a path that I will then use I will tell Photoshop to stroke along the path. So if you're used to Illustrator, you just draw a path and you tell it to put a stroke on it. Photoshop's a bit different because it's more pixel oriented. In Photoshop, I need a layer, so I'm going to need to create a layer. I'm going to put this right on top of the world here. I'm going to call this my light beams. This is the layer that I'm going to put my pixels on ultimately. Right now it's blank, there's no pixels there. When you stroke a path, it's going to use a particular tool, and it's basically going to like pretend as though, like, let's say you're using the paintbrush. It would like drag the paintbrush along the path that you draw. So you want to set the thickness ahead of time. Let's say I really only want 1 pixel stroke. So you just click on this, set a 1 pixel for your size, because it's going to use the size of your brush. It's going to use the color that you have defined as your foreground color, because it's literally like going to draw like that, except it's going to draw that along the path that we're going to make. Okay, let me undo that. So I've got the right thickness of brush, I've got the right type of brush, I've got the right color of brush. So I've set up my brush. Good, that'll be ready for when I need it. For right now, I need to use the pen tool to define the path that it will brush along. So I'm going to create a path. Notice in my paths panel, there's no paths yet. But when I start to click, it creates a work path, which is a temporary path. And I'm going to click up here to draw a straight line. Now I want to deselect that. So I can use my Command key on the Mac or Control key on Windows to click off to deselect that one, and I can draw another line. Click, click. Hold Command on the Mac or Control on Windows to click off to deselect that line, and then draw another line. What happens if you don't click off? Well, you just keep drawing that same old line, which is not what we want. So let me hit delete a couple times to delete that. So I can click. And see, the reason that the paths are nice is because if you make a mistake, you can come back in to one of your path selection tools. The black arrow, the path selection tool, would move the path as a whole. What's more interesting, though, is the direct selection tool, the white arrow. That actually allows me to click on the points that we've got here, and I can move those points around, and I can edit them later. And that's really the key to getting these angles right, is being able to see them all together. So when I go to the pen, I can click, and I can click, and if you want to make any change, just use your direct selection tool to adjust the path. You can add as many or as few of these as you like. It's kind of up to you as far as what you want. Now, if I click off the work path, you see that the path is just showing me paths that could be used for something, but they're not being used right now if I click off of the paths panel in the empty space. So I want to use those paths to stroke, and it's going to fill the currently selected layer with some pixels. So I go to my paths panel, select my path, go into the little panel menu, and say stroke that path. stroke that path with any of my tools. In this case, I already set up the brush tool to be the right kind of brush. I've already set up my color, so it's going to stroke it. When I click off, now we see the effect that it's done. It created those on this particular layer. It literally created pixels on that layer. I can now lower the opacity to make the effect more subtle. I also want it to be a little more glowy, so I'm going to double click on the right hand side and add an outer glow, which just helps to make them a little bit more interesting by having a glow on them. Okay, and again, you can make it a little more subtle. Now, let's say you don't want it everywhere. You want it to kind of look like there's more three-dimensionality to this. This big circle in the background, which would be the center big O. It would be cool if I could use that as a mask, the shape of that as a mask on my currently selected layer. So anything that you want to turn into a mask, any shape that you want to turn into a mask, if you go to that mask or that layer, assuming there's some sort of transparency, some kind of it's there, but it's not over there, it has a shape to it, such as type. If you go to that thumbnail, whether it's a thumbnail like this or the letter T, on the Mac, you hold Command when you click on that, and on Windows, you hold Control when you click on it, and it will turn it into a selection. So, for example, the right small o, if I Command click on that, or on Windows, Control click on that, it turns that into a selection. Well, normally if you want to add to your selection, you add the Shift key. So if I combine those keyboard shortcuts, so let's say I Command click on this one, which would be Control click on Windows, and then here I do Command Shift. Notice my cursor. So if I just hold Command or Control, I just get the marquee icon. But if I add Shift, now I get the plus. So that's Command Shift, or on Windows, Control Shift. I can add that to my selection, so now both things are selected. I now have a selection that I can go to my light beams layer, and I can say, hey, I want to take a layer mask and let's hide that selection. And by hiding it, you don't see the beams in those areas, so it kind of looks like they're going underneath. Pretty cool. So you don't have to see it everywhere. All right. So I think that there is just one main thing left to do, and that is to add kind of a glowing light pouring in on this guy to really focus our attention, because I think that by brightening up this area, we're going to look at him a bit more. So I want to create a light area. So I want to lighten all the stuff that I have, basically kind of lighten up this background. I want to lighten that, but I want to lighten it in an area that's kind of like, there's like a pinpoint light kind of coming here and going over this whole area. Kind of like a white light kind of coming in here. So I probably would do a curves adjustment to brighten the area. But the shape is the tricky part, because I want it to be brighter here and fade away. And I want to define this interesting shape. So for getting that, it's a little bit tricky to do that with traditional tools, because if you're using like the lasso tool or something, it's going to be an even amount of selection. I want it to be more selected up here and less selected as it gets down there. So I'm going to use a mode called Quick Mask mode. Now down here at the bottom left of the tool panel is Quick Mask mode. When you double click on Quick Mask mode, you can choose what color, what their color is going to indicate. So what are they talking about? This thing, color. What do they mean? All right, so let's go back for a second. When you have a selection, and let's switch this back to normal. When you have a selection and you go into Quick Mask mode. Now I know it says mask, but in this case, it has nothing to do with a layer mask. Layer masks are for opacity. Quick masks are for selections. When you go into Quick Mask mode, it uses a color to indicate is something selected or not. And if you think about this, the red area is masked off. It's like red masking tape. Not going to be worked with. Not going to be selected. The area that looks normal, that's what's going to be selected. That's what we're going to work with. If you go out of Quick Mask mode, you get the marquee selection as that being the indicator. So, what does that color indicate? Well, let's say I double click. For me, I just think that the masked areas being the color is just a bit weird. With computers, when you highlight things, the thing that is selected is the color. So for me, I like to change this default setting that the color indicates selected areas. So now, where you see the red, that's what's selected. It doesn't matter which way you have it set up, you have to know what the color means. I like the color to mean that something is selected, my personal preference. Now also, when you double click to go in here, you can also change the color to be some different color than some, like we already use a lot of red, so I really want to choose something like a green that doesn't normally occur in this image, and that's going to make it more obvious to see what I'm working with. Okay, so that's a bit better. All right, now, you can have a selection before you go into Quick Mask. In Quick Mask mode, you can create selections or refine selections. You don't need a selection before you go into Quick Mask mode. Now, when you go into Quick Mask mode, you're now working as kind of like you're on an overlay on the image, and all the stuff you're doing is just to create a selection. So, for example, if you use a gradient and you go from black to white, black is going to mean selected. White is going to mean deselected. So black to white, this is going to be more selected, and as it gets to him, it's going to be less selected. That's kind of cool. I can get a variable amount of selection with a gradient. That's pretty awesome. Now I can come back in with my lasso tool, and I can select the area of that I want to see, and I just want to see it in this kind of like necktie shape. I just want to see it there, which means all the rest of the stuff I want to get rid of. Now, actually, I don't want a super crisp line like that. Let's throw a feather on that. I should really feather that. Just throw in like 50 pixels of feather. That way it's a nice soft area. Okay, so at least I softened up the edge all the way around. Okay, now I want what's in here. I don't want what's out here. So I basically want to kind of delete the stuff that's out here. So let me select the inverse. So now I got all the rest of the stuff, and I want to get rid of it. So kind of deleting it. Now, before, I mentioned that black creates a selection. So this, I want to get rid of the selection, so I need to fill that with white. So if I fill with white, it's going to deselect that. Now, if you got that wrong, if you filled with black, because remember, you have a 50-50 shot. If you filled with black and it made everything green, you would just undo it and fill it with the opposite color. If you don't get it right the first time, you will get it right the second time. Okay, so let's deselect here, and let's just look at the shape of the green. The shape of the green being more green up here and being fading out here in this nice soft diffuse area, that's the shape of my selection. So I just created a really interesting selection that would have been a little bit more tough to create otherwise. When you're done making your selection, click the Quick Mask button and you get the marching ants. Now you can actually do something with that selection. I can actually go in and create my new curves adjustment layer. And I'm going to say the light from top left. And I want to brighten, starting with the brightest brights, I'm going to grab the white point and just pull over. That's really going to brighten it up in that shape. There we go. Look at that. Let's turn that on and off there. It's like turning on the light, getting him to stand out. Now, the cool thing about this layer is you can put it anywhere you want. You can have it down below just on the background. But if you were to drag this all the way up to the top and put it over everything, now it would be brightening up all of those layers. So that could create an interesting effect. You could experiment with, where exactly do you want that to be? Like, do you want it to brighten up your banner, or do you not want it to brighten up the banner? Depends on the effect that you're going for. Okay. So in the end, we have our final image, and most of these things are editable that you can go back in and make changes. You've got a lot of flexibility that you can do here. So I just want to remind you that all the instructions are written down for you. If you go to nobledesktop.com/goodies, this is in the video description. I'm going to paste it into the chat for those of you who are attending live. Just put it in the chat, but just go to nobledesktop.com/goodies. Scroll down here, and you can get the instructions as a PDF. and you can get the class files. If you have an older version of Photoshop, just grab one of the older ones. It's pretty similar. There'll be some slight differences, but you'll be able to follow along with that. And for those of you who are attending live, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Give a couple minutes for Q&A in the chat while I'm waiting for people to type in some of those things. Like I said, if you want to learn more, we got bunches of books here on different topics. If you want to learn web design with Photoshop, if you ever want to go to a specific kind of category, you could just click on the category and see what things like creating animated GIFs in Photoshop, for example. And so books are a great way to learn more, or like I said, you can attend any of our classes online or in person if you make it here to New York City. Oh, I love that comment. Somebody said 20 plus year Photoshop user and you still taught me some neat tricks. Awesome. One of my favorite tricks though is that that drop shadow, the drop shadow on the type. So many people still don't know that you can drag shadows around. So many people don't know that trick. Also, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can get notifications of future videos that we might be posting, and follow us on Twitter and Facebook for notifications of other stuff. And but definitely be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube here. And hope to see you guys in a future seminar. If you're watching the recording, hope you guys enjoyed and got a lot out of it as well. Question in the chat, do we have some tutorials on Illustrator? We do have some, we have like an intro to Illustrator, I believe. I don't know if it's currently scheduled right now, but you can always check out our free seminars page for upcoming seminars. We do have some seminars on Adobe Illustrator. All right, so it looks like nobody else has questions here, so I'm going to say thanks for coming, everybody, and hope you enjoyed. And until next time.